change our names, Mikey.
Okay.
Hello.
Mr. Martin.
What up? Helps if I turn my headset on.
How the devil are you, buddy?
I'm here. Probably the best way to put it. How about yourself? You good?
Yeah, can you, mate?
Cool. Let me know.
John, you're really quiet.
It's always a first time for everything, Alex.
How are you, buddy?
How about now?
My
Any
Zoom
better?
is crashing. I can't see who's on.
Hold on. Let me see if I can.
Yeah, can you, mate?
How do I make this not full screen? Ah, that's how.
John, you're really quiet.
How about now? Is that any better?
Still really quiet, I'm afraid.
Okay. Give me a second.
If you go into audio settings, you might be able to turn the sensitivity of your mic up.
I wonder if it's selecting the wrong mic.
Give me 5 seconds. How about now? Still quiet? Now? Is that any better?
Still really quiet, mate.
Yes, I can hear the tone. Okay, let's see. So, I mean, this has got it bouncing halfway up the input level. Let me see. Let me switch to the mic in the webcam and see if that works. Pushing out a button.
Yeah, my Zoom is. I need to close a few things down.
Right. How about now? Is that any better? Nope. Okay, give me a second. Microphone. Which one are you doing? Come on, tell me which one you're using. That's not helping. No. Wrong button.
Oh,
Let's
Jesse.
think. Right. Do I figure out how to tell it which one to do? Sound settings. Okay, let's think. Yeah. Okay, is that nope? That's still really quiet. How about this one? That better? No. Yes. Maybe.
Really quiet.
Okay, give me 5 seconds. I'll break out the emergency one.
Mikey, can you just say something for balance to make sure I can hear you? And Anna, do you want to check everything is working for you as well?
Can you hear my horse?
I can hear your voice.
Anna's muted. Anna, can you just unmute?
Hello, sorry.
Anna's good, I think, volume-wise.
You can hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Awesome.
You're not showing your webcam or anything, which is fine. For people who are attending as attendees, we will be starting, you've got the agenda up in front of you here. We'll be starting properly at about 7. But for now, we're just doing tech checks and things and hanging out.
Alex, do you have the link for YouTube?
I do have the link to YouTube. I'll stick it in the chat in case anybody has any issues with Zoom. We are now live streaming to YouTube already. I'll go into the chat. Where's my chat gone? Problem with too many monitors. There we are.
We got video for you, Anna and John.
I think they've just got cameras turned off right now.
Do you want to test, either one of you? Maybe try the screen share as well, just to make sure that you're both presenters. Can we hear you, John or Anna?
When I try and share my video, it says I can't because you have to allow it.
Oh,
Okay.
See,
Does
so you
that
might
give
want to.
you... Oops, sorry. Is that
Your
audio
mic
any
sounds
better,
a
Alex?
lot better.
Yeah,
Yes.
I've broken out the posh mic.
Nice.
I've got, you know, the type of thing you see at proper conferences. I've got one that plugs into the machine via USB. So, well, the receiver does, and I've got one of...
It's your singing mic, isn't it, John? Come on, admit it.
Damn it, you rumbled me, man. Right. Try
Good. So
not...
you're both co-hosts now, I can see. So maybe, John, if you try your screen share, just to make sure it's working okay.
Okay, give me a
Hi, Anna. I
second.
see you
Hello.
now. And John, you should be able to put your video on as well. Ah, there you are.
Okay, tell me if... right, I just want to quickly blur the background. Somehow. You know, I don't know how to blur my background.
Zoom likes you to give it backgrounds.
I have some weird spaceship thing.
Yeah, that'll do.
Right, so sharing screen. Okay, so if I come down to the screen share, there it is. Confusing. Stop it, Zoom. Screen share. Okay, yes. This one. Share. Can you see the thingy?
Yep. Perfect. You've got a bit of a split screen thing going on. Is that right?
I'm just overlaying everything.
Yeah.
So it's fantastic.
Yeah, that's fine.
Pull command prompt in a second. Can you read that all right, or do you need it larger?
I can read it, but I think it needs to be a little bit bigger. It is quite small.
Okay, let's bring this one up. So is that better on
Yeah.
the VS Code?
That's good.
Okay, which means we then need to come into here, settings.
For people that are joining, we're just doing a few tech checks. And then we'll be starting in a few minutes.
Appearance. Let's take it at 18 and see if that works. Okay, the code on the left, as I'm seeing it, is that better now?
Yeah, there's a little bit bigger. I think once you start typing as well. There's just one line there anyway. So
Okay.
yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, and then final one is just to check the slides. When I do the swapping them over, because for some reason, terrifying
Looks
picture.
good.
Okay, cool. Right, I'll hand that over to. How do I stop sharing? Stop share.
Yeah, Anna, if you give it a go as well.
Yep.
I'll sort my hair out in a second.
Yes, we can see that all fine. Looks good.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I'll take the screen share back.
I'm in desperate need of a haircut.
See that now. You're open now, right? I think. I don't know. Where are my participants control
Yeah,
gone?
we've got a few attendees joined already. I think we officially said we're going to start at 7, so we've just got the early birds here at the moment, but more people will be coming in time, I'm sure. We are already streaming to YouTube, so
terrifying.
everything you do and say is going to be taken in evidence.
So first things first, let's go and exit anything that could pop something up. Shall we? That's probably the best thing to be doing right now.
Yes, welcome everyone to Wessex. So Wessex was an old Anglo-Saxon kingdom before England became one country. So it's one of the old countries. So you're joining us today as we travel through the nations and the old countries. We've got the wonderful John and Anna here with us today.
John, Anna, how are you finding the transition to remote events rather than kind of in-person events?
Can I be really honest?
You can be as honest as you
Can.
like. We're all friends.
I'm not a fan of online events. I struggle with them.
Yeah.
I personally find them very, very difficult. Just because I'd really like to see the people. I take a lot of visual cues. I'm a very visual sort of receptive person, and I just find it very difficult. I find it very difficult to learn from them as well, unfortunately. So, but it is what it is. It's the world we're in, so I've got to adapt and overcome my my preconceptions, maybe probably the best way of putting it, and some of the issues I've got. So
would it be easier for you if we left our webcams on while you were presenting, so you at least had some employee?
Yeah, if that's cool. And feel free to chime in with questions at any point. That's one of the things I do.
Yep, we can do that.
If someone says anything, just interrupt. It's all good. But no, I mean, other than that, it's fantastic to see the remote events personally. It means that it's a lot easier for more people to get to them, which is the best thing. And that's that's one of the key things, I think, from an accessibility perspective. I don't know about you, Anna, and how you're finding it.
I find it really lonely. It's like 45 minutes of talking to myself. Whereas when you're in a room with people, you, like you said, you can read their reactions and people can fire questions at you. Whereas, yeah, online, I'm just chatting away to myself and hoping it's making sense to everyone.
It is really hard as a presenter, isn't it? Because like so many of us, we feed off. It's really hard to teach somebody when you can't see the person you're teaching.
Yes.
Yeah.
You need that reaction.
It's when you see it in the eyes, and it sort of goes from to and it's like fine. I've said something that's useful.
So for anybody that's attending, I think one thing you can do to help is just get into that chat window.
Yep.
I don't know, Anna, John, do you tend to watch chat windows when you present?
If I've got a sorry, Anna, were you?
If I'm honest, no, because I'm focused on what I'm talking about, but that doesn't mean you can't shout out questions if they're really relevant to what I'm talking about. If something hasn't made sense to people, then by all means interrupt me and fire questions away.
Do you want any help timekeeping as well? Are you okay just watching the clock a little bit?
I think I'm okay, because I've practiced this on a couple of times on smaller groups, so I've been pretty spot on with time.
Cool.
This time I'll either be really short or really over. There'll be no in between.
And John, so we'll jump in with questions then.
Yeah, keep me on track with timers as well, because I can disappear down a rabbit hole. But oh, this is really cool and stuff like that. It's like you've got 5 minutes, get a move on. Okay, so that's cool. But yeah, we're 45 minutes, aren't we? So
I've done it. I tried to time his pre-con. He's terrible. He needs work.
I love what I'm talking about.
I know.
So, but no, it's all good fun. I'm actually turning this this session. That's another stuff into a full day of training. So it's going to be fun.
I like the new bike, by the way.
Triumph. Oh, it's nice.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Have you got a new back?
New bike. You need a new
Bike.
bike, probably.
Yeah, I could
I was
definitely.
going to say,
do a new back.
I thought you might appreciate a new back.
Oh, I would. Trust me. No, new bike, and it's really nice.
What bike have you got?
I got Triumph's Speed Triple.
Triumph Speed Triple.
Yeah,
Jesse, can you pull up a picture of what a Triumph Speed Triple looks like? I'm
they're
curious.
nice. Speed Triple
Let's
RS.
see. Triple RS?
RS, yeah, 2020. Because they just released a brand new one after I bought
Oh
mine.
wow.
So that's the new one. That's the old one. The
That's
one that's on the
junk.
top right, the yellow and black one.
This one?
Yeah, it's basically what I've got.
Very nice.
Yes. I'm very content with it. Went down to Portland, which is 60 miles away for a cup of coffee and back the weekend.
Nice.
That's all
My
good.
wife has just started riding, and she's always much cooler than me in everything that she does. Yeah, she's just started riding, driving up and down her leathers, and yeah, she's a lot cooler than I am.
It's fun. It's nice just to get out and coming back from there. It's traffic. Nope. What traffic? Made life a lot easier. Oh. If I said I'm going to grab myself a glass of water, I'll be right back.
I think. Getting a few more people joining as attendees now. I'm sure the numbers will increase. I think we only advertised 7 o'clock start, so welcome to everybody that's joining nice and early.
Wonder when we'll be back in person. Some more countries have been added to the red list now.
A big
It's
question.
interesting, isn't it?
It's really difficult. It's really difficult because, like, just in the last few months, like, it keeps feeling like maybe it's going to be okay. Vaccines are going great, and then a few days later, it feels like it's not going to be okay again for years. And it's when do you pull the trigger on organising a five?
I saw though they are actually I don't know when this is. So they're organising this like 5,000 person gig. I think it's in where is it? I'm trying to. It's in Liverpool. It's going to happen
That's a trial
on.
one, isn't it?
It's a
See how
trial,
it goes.
yeah. So it's on the 2nd of May, and you have to have a negative COVID test before. So I think that'll be a really good test. I mean, 5,000 is massive.
It will, I do just feel like data relay is specifically designed to spread COVID as well. Like, think about the concept, right? We get
Travel.
200 people together in one room,
Yeah.
and then all of the speakers and helpers get into one bus where we share all of our germs, and we keep doing it again and again. We get more and more tired throughout the week. Like, we're just driving around with our COVIDs and spreading it to different cities as we go. With all of the people, all of the international speakers as well, flying in from all the different countries that they come from. So, like, I'm desperate to run it again as soon as we can, but at the same time, I don't know when that's going to be. Like, our usual spot would be this autumn, and will it be okay in autumn? I don't know. Would you take that bet? I don't know.
Those of you that are attending, welcome. It would be nice to hear if you've been to a physical data relay event before. So let us know in the chat.
Yeah, which events?
Or is this your first one?
Which kingdoms are you all joining from? Do you know which Old English kingdoms you were, or maybe you weren't in an Old English kingdom. Maybe you were in Wales or Scotland or further afield.
Oh, I can probably set up a poll.
Mm.
Get the map up and then.
That's a good idea. In case you haven't figured it out, this is the first time Data Relay has gone virtual. So we're all figuring it out as we go, and we're finding all the bells and whistles. So expect this to be a little bit chaotic. It's going to be a lot of fun as we figure all this stuff out. Oh, there we are.
that? Oh, that's difficult. That's confusing.
Uh,
I just want it blobby and.
that looks like a pretty good one. It's got a whole bunch of them on there. Of course, it's
Oh
got
yeah, because it's got Dunmonia.
it's got Dumnonia, it's got West Saxona, which is Wessex, East Anglia,
that's what's confusing
Venetia,
me.
and Diera combined at one point. So this is probably a little bit before. Is it obvious that I've been listening to the British History podcast and watching The Last Kingdom?
Very.
Geeking out about kind of old English kingdoms.
Let me see if I can get. Oh, this one's better. This is actually our kingdoms.
I've never seen Kent spelt Kentware with a C. There we are.
That's the one.
Oh, but Dumnonia's not on that one.
Oh no, yeah.
Also, based on this one, I expect that both Rob and the Allens count as Wessex rather than down in Cornwall.
Back.
Hello.
Welcome everyone. I can see a few more attendees.
A very big glass of water. My allergies are playing up something chronic at the minute. Come on.
Hi Ron from the East Angles. East Angle? Is it East Anglia? First time at Data Relay?
The East Angles were the
here?
cultural group that settled in East Anglia. Well, the Angles were, and the East Angles was the colony they set up when later became East Anglia.
So yeah, so technically I'm from Pickland, hiding down here in Wessex.
Down here.
All the way down there.
So London's in it kind of crosses all of these different areas.
London has been fought over for hundreds and hundreds of years. At various points it belonged in, for a long time it was in Mercia. It was controlled by Essex in the early days. Kent have had significant sway over it. Wessex has had significant sway over it. I think that's kind of almost the point. It's like on that border between them all, which makes it like it became really big because it was a big market center on the Thames, easy access out to the water, but also right in the heart of everything.
Welcome everyone. We'll get started in a few minutes. Jeffrey's liking the history lesson from you, Alex.
What's that?
So Jeffrey in the chat is liking the history lesson from you.
Maybe I need to set up a separate discussion. Seriously, British History podcast. Well, I watched The Last Kingdom and I was like, this is amazing. I want to learn more about whether or not this is true. And so I started listening to the British History podcast. And now I'm getting up to the Alfred versus the Vikings period of time, which is amazing. He does, I want to get through the main podcast bit, but then he does a bit where he reviews The Last Kingdom specifically. And then I think I'm going to rewatch The Last Kingdom again to see how close it is to the truth. Because a lot of the battles were real battles and a lot of the characters were real characters. So it's kind of fun the way that they mix up real history and fictional stories. Yeah.
So Wessex was named after the West Saxons. Wessex.
Essex was the East Saxons, Middlesex was the Middle Saxons, Sussex was the South Saxons. Wouldn't have wanted to live in the north.
Welcome everyone. I'm going to get started in a few minutes. I hope everyone's excited. This is our first session of 5 this week. We've got John and Anna here with us. See Arthur, moderator and King of the Britons. That's how you'll be introduced today.
Yep, pretty much.
Okay, shall we get started with some introductions? Let's meet everyone on the call. So welcome everyone, thanks for joining. Welcome to Wessex. I just want to go around and give everyone a chance to just say a quick hello. So I'm Jessie, I'm your host for today. So put your questions in the chat, I'll be moderating. We're going to go through a few rules in a second, but first of all, hi John.
Oh,
Nice to have you. Hi Anna.
Hello.
Hello. We've got Arthur here,
Hi, Jess.
moderator and king of the Britons. And we have Alex here as well,
Thanks.
who will be helping us with any tech. So if you do have any tech issues throughout the call, do feel free to private message Alex specifically. Let us know in the chat as well if something goes wrong and you don't hear. Don't leave us hanging, do let us know. Urge you all to really do participate in the chat. All these online events can be quite tough. Having done a few myself, you're kind of just staring at the screen and hoping that everyone's listening. So anything you put in the chat, please do. No question is silly. So yeah, please do put it in the chat. Few rules before we get started. Well, there's one. Be nice to everyone. There is a full version there, which is the code of conduct, which I'm not going to go through. I'll close all these things down. But yeah, in short, be considerate towards each other. Be nice. Don't say anything mean to each other. And yeah, just be respectful. If you do find that there is any of this going on, send me a private message, and we'll make sure that that doesn't continue in our old kingdoms. So today we're in Wessex and we have the wonderful John and Anna. We have Mercia on Tuesday, Northumbria, East Anglia, Damnonia. I'm not going to go through all the speaker names here, but do check us out on all our socials and the Data Relay website as well, if you'd like to see what is coming up next throughout the week. Does anyone else have anything else to say? If not, I'm going to hand over to John. Awesome. Over to you, John.
thank you very much. Give me 5 seconds to figure this whole screen sharing thing out. Okay. I think we are ready to roll. Should we be able to see the slide deck now?
I've got a little bit quieter again. Is that just me?
How about now? Better? Or no?
Yeah,
Is it
John,
just-
you've gone
yeah.
back to quiet how you were when you first joined the call again.
How about now? Any better? Always
Quite. A little bit quiet still. Is there
Okay, that was working fine and then it stopped.
so in your audio settings, there's a setting in the microphone where it decides how kind of sensitive your mic is.
Yeah.
Wonder if you can turn that up.
How's that? Is that better? Is that still very quiet?
It's still quite quiet.
Right, 5 seconds. Let's see. How about now?
Yes. Awesome. We can
Wait.
see you, we can hear you.
That's all right. Just stick that back on the t-shirt. Hopefully you can still hear me fine. Better? Okay. Any problems again? Give me a shout. Any questions? Feel free to interrupt any point and we'll go from there. So thank you very much to the Relay team for having me on this evening. We're going to be talking about Terraform and essentially a concept called infrastructure as code, why it's important and why it's really something we should be looking at, whether we're infrastructure professionals or data professionals. Okay. So it's about a 50-50 split between slides and demos. So we'll try and make it a little bit more entertaining. And now I just need to make this work. That's better. Who am I? My name's John Martin. I'm a data platform consultant, Microsoft Data Platform MVP, been doing Microsoft Data Platform and cloud stuff for more time than I can really remember. And that's enough about me. Contact details will be up at the end again as well. So if you do want to get in touch with me about anything we discussed today, feel free to just reach out, Twitter, LinkedIn, drop me an email. So we will start with infrastructure as code. What is it? Why should we be using it? Why is it important? Okay. So when we start thinking about our infrastructure, we think about some of the things that we've had to deal with over the past. So you start thinking about, well, we've got a problem. Who made a change? We're deploying new applications. What changes were made in order to make it work? How's the infrastructure evolved as our application code, our database code, anything, whatever, increases in complexity, or we deploy new versions, things like that. And having that traceability and that change control is something that's very, very important, whether you're in the development side of things or if you're on the operational side of things. So it's also very important to understand the baseline. So again, when you start troubleshooting, is this basically configured it's supposed to look like, from say the number of servers you've got? I mean, when you start taking that to the cloud side of things, it becomes even more important, because you're dealing with sort of pseudo infrastructure when you're dealing with things like platform as a service. So when you look at Azure, in particular, you're looking at app service, VNets, virtual machines, Azure SQL database, data factory, all of these things. There's no tangible infrastructure there. They're all services we're consuming in one form or another. And being able to compare them back and understand, okay, well, does this match what it's supposed to look like? And who made those changes, where and when were those changes made? That traceability is very important. And the traceability is a core sort of concept from the development side of the house. Who made changes to our application code, where and when and why? And the why is just as important. Bringing that to the infrastructure side of the house, when we are doing cloud computing, or we're using AWS, we're using GCP, we're using Azure, becomes very, very important, because essentially the code we're deploying onto those services, they really sort of sit in lockstep. So version 1 of my code matches with version 3 of my application, for example. So that becomes very, very important. And having that traceability makes our lives a lot easier. It's also the ability to encapsulate complexity. Now, I don't know if anyone's tried spinning up something like multi-region Azure SQL database, so highly resilient, across multiple regions, with all of the networking, private endpoints, all that sort of stuff. Okay, there's a lot of moving parts that go into it, and not everybody's at the same sort of point on that learning curve when it comes to sort of cloud platforms. So encapsulating a lot of that complexity makes it a lot easier for us to engage and bring a lot more of the team into the fold when it comes to deploying and managing this infrastructure. Okay, it also means that we can standardize on things. So this is what our standard Azure SQL Server Azure SQL database deployment should look like. This is what our standard VNet infrastructure should deploy as. These are our standard things. So policies, you name it, app service. This is standard app service configuration. So you've got the app plan, the app service, the slots, all of that sort of stuff. You can create modules. You can wrap sort of that up and give it to someone, and then all they need to feed in are the key parameters and the key variables to give it the right name in the right place, and off you go. So again, you're taking and abstracting a level of that complexity away, so it means that we can get people delivering more value and being active and members of the team a lot quicker, and then they can start digging into that complexity, and you don't end up having to onboard someone for 2 or 3 months, that type of thing. So it has some real benefits there as well. And I touched on briefly at the beginning was about the versioning piece of it. We're looking at this and saying, okay, well, version 1 of our infrastructure, version 2 of our infrastructure, version 3 of our infrastructure, again, when it comes to the cloud side of things, is very, very important, because if our app development team are actually going to say, well, we would historically we had some websites and they talk to a SQL Server database. Well, now we're adding this new functionality in, and we're going to need graphing capability. So we need you to deploy Cosmos with Gremlin API side of things, or we're going to be deploying something that needs Azure Blob storage. So now technically you're really in a position where you say, well, this is what our infrastructure is, this is what it needs to look like. If you take a code-based approach, you can start easily refining that for deployments through your non-production environments. So you can put that all into build pipelines, out it goes, does the application deploy, does the application run? You can start building it into part of the regression testing, the integration testing, and the unit testing of the applications, because the infrastructure is there. And you're essentially signing off on this version of our infrastructure is compatible with this version of our application. And then you can keep them going in the sort of same in the versioning, that type of thing. It makes life a lot easier, again, for troubleshooting. Is it on a supported configuration for us internally? You deal with that sort of situation when you're dealing with external vendors all of the time. Our application needs SQL Server 2016, for example. We're happy to accept it from an external vendor. really we want to be looking at providing that as a service to our teams when we're doing that collaboration internally as well. So again, that's a very, very important concept to start getting your head around. And the idempotence of it as well. Now, historically, in the early days of the Azure platform, when you're dealing with CLI, when you're dealing with PowerShell, you ran the same thing a couple of times and you make errors. It's, oh, this already exists, or that's trying to rebuild stuff and what have you. It's not great. It's got a lot better. But essentially what you want to be get into a position is that I can rerun the same code over and over and over. And essentially it's putting it into a position to say, well, it's as it should be. I'm not going to bother with it. Okay, well, no, that's not right. I'm going to turn that to the right thing. But essentially I run it with the same set of parameters every single time. I'm going to get the same sort of thing out. It makes life a lot easier for us. Okay. So that's a high level sort of what is infrastructure code and why it's important to us. Like I say, building on those elements from a process perspective, from an operational perspective, consistency is the thing that it really gives us. So we take infrastructure as code and it gives us this consistency where I can say any member of the team, if they feed this in, is going to get the same thing out. It's not going to be reliant on someone clicking through a wizard, clicking through the portal, clicking through anything like that, or they're rolling their own scripts or things like that. What it means is that for the same input, I get the same output. Reason being is we're taking people out of the loop. People are fallible. We make mistakes, quite simply. That's how I learned a lot of my lessons over the course of my career. And you end up with also some of these inconsistencies, so that someone do something slightly different every which way. Capitalizations, naming, tags, casing, not ticking the right box, things like that, okay? We get the same thing every single time. So when you roll from non-production to production, you've got that confidence that when you get there, it's going to happen. And that brings us into the repeatability piece of things, which is I can repeatably and very easily deploy multiple environments very quickly. When you think about what we were doing on premises, even with virtualization platforms, it wasn't always a trivial task to stand up multiple servers. So standing up a brand new web farm with a SQL Server backend that's highly resilient, potentially running that in with storage that's vvols or anything like that. There's a lot of moving parts that cross multiple pillars. And it's about saying, okay, well, I can do this quickly and easily. I can repeat it over and over and over, but it's going to consume a lot of person time. Whereas if we go to infrastructure as code and we can script a lot of it, and it's a lot of this is not just applicable to the cloud environment. Because I mean, when we start talking about what Terraform can do, it has got providers for some of the on-premises side of things. So things like VMware, for example, there's a provider there. And there's a couple of people starting to talk about that in the community, so it's well worth having a look to see where those sessions are if you are in a sort of on-premises or a hybrid environment as well. But again, you come to the cloud side of things, I've got a team of 10 developers. Well, we don't want them all using the same resources because then you'll end up potentially with conflicts. And standing up 10 environments for them, if we've got infrastructure as code, it becomes a very easy task for us to do. They just feed in their own set of variables, they get their own set of stuff into an isolated location. And then that again takes us into the sort of automation perspective of it. So really it's a case of if we take what we've got, it's all infrastructure as code, it's all parameterized. Well, that lends itself well to pushing it into something on Azure DevOps pipeline, Jenkins, Bamboo, you name it, any automation platform. Essentially because it's all there as code and it's all scriptable, I can just push that in and I can do things like token replacement. I can substitute values in for where I need them. I can pass in a parameters file, things like that. And what it means is that, again, I commit a build of the infrastructure, I commit a version of the code to GitHub or Azure DevOps Git or whatever, and it kicks off a build and says, okay, well, does it work? We take that don't break the build concept from the development environment, put it into the infrastructure environment, and they line up. And again, if we're going to make an infrastructure change, we can test it out very quickly and it automatically deploys. I don't have to sit there and do things interactively. I don't run the risk of working on something that someone else is working on at the same sort of time. So that automation element of it, repeatability, consistency, it just means that we're getting away from having to spend a lot of time and effort and concentration on doing the small, quite frankly, mundane things, rather than being able to deliver the value that we can deliver as technical professionals. I mean, I know that I'd rather spend a lot more time performance tuning, bug hunting, bug fixing, streamlining processes than building servers, deploying Azure resources through the portal or whatever. That's not hugely valuable to the business and things like that. So it's not valuable to my customers. Whereas if I can spend time not thinking about that and actually, like I say, well, we've got this bug, I found it, we fixed it. We're realizing better benefits. We're getting more value for them. And that's what this will give us. Then we come on and we start thinking about what the options are. And it's going to be largely dependent about which platforms you're using. Now, as I said, typically the focus of this talk is really about the Azure platform. But when we start talking about Azure, we've got the option of ARM, we've got the option of PowerShell. So Azure Resource Management Manager, which is personally something I find very, very difficult. I think it's very, very complex. And if I put it down for a little while, I struggle to go back to it. Whereas there's some other options around when it comes to that. So PowerShell, one of the things with PowerShell, I kind of got to remember which order I've got to build everything in and how I'm going to write my scripts and how I'm going to execute my code. It can be done. You got Azure CLI as well. One of the big things you'll find, especially in the Azure sort of space, is that actually none of the tools have 100% coverage of the platform for what you're trying to achieve potentially. Now, if you're dealing with an area that's completely covered by PowerShell, completely covered by Azure CLI, completely covered by ARM, you're great. But as soon as you have to poke something that's not part of that, it becomes a little bit more complex. But that's the world we live in. If you're on Google, you've got options there as well. If you're on AWS, you've got CloudFormation. These are all sort of disparate platforms now. Obviously, if you're working in a large enterprise, you may end up picking one cloud vendor and you stick with that cloud vendor. Whereas if you're a consultant or contractor, things like that, you're going to potentially chop between customers, and not everybody's using Azure or AWS or GCP. Some will be finding differences potentially in the customers you're working with. So having to learn multiples makes your life a little bit more difficult, or it's going to constrain where you want to be working. Okay, so how do we fix that? Well, this is where Terraform comes in. Now, Terraform is I'm trying to think the best way to phrase this. It's a platform agnostic way of managing your infrastructure or your resources in cloud platforms or even on premises, like I said, with VMware, and you've got the provider there. It doesn't, however, allow you to build cloud agnostic or platform agnostic definitions. Okay, this is more of an interface layer where I've got one syntax to remember for deploying AWS or Google or VMware or Azure. Okay, so the syntax is the same, but the definitions of the resources will be entirely dependent on the platform we're deploying to, because what it's doing behind the scenes is talking to the APIs. And obviously the requirements for deploying a VM or an RDS instance of SQL in AWS is going to be different to deploying a VM or an Azure SQL database instance in Azure, because they require different parameters, different things like that. Okay, so those will be unique, but the syntax we're using to interact with them, that's what remains consistent, which means you can pick it up and put it down. And it's a lot, I find the learning curve is not as steep. Personally, I find some of these other platforms as well. So that's what we're going to look through. When we get into the demos, we're going to start talking about what Terraform is and how it can help us out. So just to be clear on this, Terraform itself is a syntax, and we'll cover that one in a moment, but essentially what it is, it's a small command line application, and you can get it for Unix, Linux, Mac, or Windows. Okay, so it doesn't matter what your development environment is, what you're running on your laptop. You could be running Mac OS, I'm running Windows, that type of thing. It doesn't matter. The application itself, we feed it the same syntax, it will do the same things for us, but I don't have to run a Windows VM for everything or things like that. I don't have to run a Linux VM or anything like that. My platform that I'm developing on and the one that I'm using day to day is the one that I can keep using. It uses the HashiCorp configuration language, HCL language. Now, this is a syntax. It's very JSON in its sort of approach. And I personally find it very clear. Makes my life a little bit easier. Like I say, I can pick it up and put it down and not have to sort of refresh very little. One of the things that I do find very useful about this, however, is I don't have to remember the order in which I'm defining my resources or how I'm writing my scripts. It's largely independent. Now, when we look at the code in a bit, you'll see that I've got multiple files that that form my project for Terraform. And it's not your typical sort of Visual Studio type project where you've got a solution file and a project file and things like that. Essentially, it's a collection of files in a directory, and I tell Terraform, go look there, look for everything that essentially it's got the right file suffix, bring it all together, give me my output. Now, what that means is that Terraform has to do a lot of legwork for us, and it's going to say, okay, well, these are all the resources you want to deploy. Have you got any dependencies? And I can define explicit or implicit dependencies between them, and Terraform will then work out what needs to be deployed serially versus what it can deploy in parallel. So it takes a lot of my thinking away from me, which is great because I've only got a small little head. Terraform knows what it's doing. I trust it. It works. And like I say, so long as I give it the right information to work out what those dependencies are, it will do the work. It'll do the heavy lifting for us of making sure that things get deployed in the right way. And we can visualize that, and I'll show you that as well as we go through. And the other thing I really like about Terraform is the stateful nature of it. So what it will do is it will actually create a JSON file, and I can either store it locally if I'm working interactively, or I can put it centrally into an S3 bucket or Azure Blob storage or the Terraform cloud service. And essentially what it means is I've got a central point for what that infrastructure should look like, which when we start thinking about the automation piece, which we spoke about earlier, if we've got collaborative environments, or even if we're looking at production and saying, oh, well, has anything changed since the last deployment? So if someone got in and updated something manually, I've got a reference file I can go back and check against. And you can script against it, just for whatever. Do not change it, because obviously that's going to mess with what Terraform see. But what it does mean is if you want to build in some testing or send things like that, it's a standard sort of JSON format which we can query and then do something with. So if you want to run your own pester tests, for example, against the deployed infrastructure and say, does this current infrastructure match what's in the state file without having to do a Terraform plan? So there's a couple of different ways we can look at it. So that's a very high level view of the Terraform itself ecosystem. We start thinking about some of the components that go into building it. This is where we've got the foundation of it is providers. Okay, so essentially it's a big sort of pluggable component system. And the providers are essentially our layer between the HCL I define and what happens on the cloud platform or the platform I'm targeting. So in this scenario, the provider would be Azure RM, which is the one we're going to look through today, or the AWS one, or the GCP one, or the VMware, or whatever. Okay, and this is the one that gives us that ability to say, okay, well, what are our providers? What's the syntax we're using? And work through with those ones. And that's our interface layer, essentially. Now, once we've got our provider, give me 1 second. Just try and close this window. Noise out there. Once we've got our providers, that's when we start defining our resources. And the resources are the things that we want to deploy. This is your app services, your Azure SQL Server, your Azure SQL DB, your RDS instance, your EC2 VM, whatever, okay? And this is, we define our resource, we deploy the resource, and the various different properties that it requires for us to be able to set it. So name, location, tags. Those are probably the 3 core things that we need to remember for everything. This is the bit where we start defining our relationships and our interdependencies between these items. Okay, so obviously we take Azure as an example. We've got the resource group. We need to deploy that before we can deploy resources. So what we can do is we can reference the resource group in the resources, and then we've inferred that dependency, which makes our lives a little bit easier. We have data sources as well. So if, for example, you think about the cloud adoption framework, and you're talking about things like the hub and spoke model, enterprise WAN, things like that. Now, I don't want to manage that in one huge Terraform project. That becomes unmanageable. It becomes very difficult to deal with. So I want to break it down into sub areas. Okay. Now, what this data sources allows us to do is look up against existing resources. So I can define, go and look up this app service or this VNet, for example. So if we've got a spoke that we want to plug into the hub, go and look up the hub so I can reference components from there when I'm building and defining my resources here to plug into them. Makes our lives a little bit easier there. One more thing on the data sources piece is you don't always have to reference the resources themselves. You can actually reference a state file from another project. we're not going to cover that one's a little bit more complex. So we'll stick with the other ones for today. Variables. Now, when we start thinking about variables, this is where I want to say, okay, well, I'm going to pass in the name of a resource group. Well, that's going to change every deployment potentially. So if I've got it in development, I've got it in production, I've got it in whatever non-production environment. If I make and use variables to set the values and the properties of the resources I'm deploying, it becomes very reusable. Okay, that's how we start doing that encapsulation. That's how we start doing that sort of abstraction of complexity away. Is I define what it should look like, and I say, here's the variables. Just give those values, and it will pop out the other end for you. Outputs is a way for us to actually have information about what we deployed pushed out to our console window. Sorry. Now, essentially, what this allows us to do is I deploy an Azure SQL database, for example, and I want the connection string, I want the server name, I want the database name, things like that I can have pushed to the console so that I can then use them. Okay. If you're using things like Azure DevOps, there are pipeline components there, excuse me, which will read the console output and allow you to then attribute them to pipeline variables, which you can then feed into other areas of the pipeline. So you can deploy your infrastructure, and then you can deploy your application. You can pass in the connection strings and things like that, just by taking and reading that output and passing them further down the pipeline, which means you can end up deploying your version, you deploy your application and your infrastructure in the same pipeline, which makes life a little bit easier. And then finally, modules, which we're not going to cover in any great depth today, but essentially this allows us to do what I said earlier about really abstracting that complexity away and say, this is what our multi-region Azure SQL database deployment looks like. So I would have the deployment for the database in both sides. We set up the replication, all that sort of stuff. And it just, there it is. Give it this and it will go away and deal with that. And you don't have to go in and reference and create all of those resources and define them yourself. Again, that's where it comes into sort of really helping sort of empower people to say, go and be productive, do your best work, allow people to really sort of show what they can do. And pulling all this together, that's essentially what it is. And like I said earlier, it's just basically a folder structure with our Terraform files in there. So with that being about just over halfway through, we're going to demos. Are there any questions so far? I can't see the chat window in Zoom at the moment. Arthur or Jesse, have we got anything in the chat window? Any questions at all?
There's nothing yet, John. Nothing
yet. So either everybody's gone to sleep, sleeping off their dinner, or I'm doing a reasonably all right job. So give me 5 seconds and we will pull up VS Code. If anybody needs me to make this any larger, let me know. Okay. So what we'll do, let's jump into demo 1. And let me just come to here. Figure this out a second. Let's change that for you. Can everyone see that all right? Do you want me to try and switch to light mode?
I think that's good.
Okay,
if anybody has any problems, just let me know in the chat.
Yeah, ping me and I'll switch it over. So over here on the left-hand side, I've got the folder structure for demo 1. Okay, and what we're going to do here is we're just going to talk through the fundamentals of setting up our provider and connecting to our platform that we want to deploy to. Okay, so you'll notice here that I've also got the little main.tf and the providers.tf. .tf essentially tells Terraform this is your file. Okay, so when you're telling it to deal with a directory, anything that's suffix tf, sorry, is what it will go and have a look at and interpret. Okay, so within that, let's get rid of this complex one for the minute because that's getting ahead of ourselves. So we start with provider. Essentially, it's a very simple little block. Here I'm specifying hard coding the version and any particular feature. So this is like destroying disks when you destroy VMs. There's certain flags that you can set in here. Okay. Now this is because I'm using Azure CLI for an interactive session. Okay. So here I'm basically saying when I run Terraform at the command line, all I'm telling it is that go and look up the version and then use everything for my session. And I'll show you that in a moment. We jump into the command line to run stuff. So before we get there, the other alternative is if we want to use something like, for example, a service principal with this. Okay, so if we zoom in here, this is where it starts to get a little bit more complex, and we can say, okay, I want to pass in a specific subscription ID, a client ID, which is our service principal ID, the secret, which comes out of it, and the tenant ID as well, where we're authenticating against. So if we're going to go in and do things from an automation perspective, you could, in theory, do the whole AZ CLI setup and log in and everything like that. Best way to do it if you're doing automation, use a service principal, really. Makes our lives a lot easier. And this allows us to parameterize things like the subscription ID and the secrets that we're using as well, and allows us, if we're using things like Azure DevOps, to link in and put those secrets into Azure Key Vault, which means we can then keep them nice and secure as we work through with those. Okay, so the demos I'm going to do today are going to be done using the interactive mode. So I've already logged in with the Azure CLI to save the pain of having to look at that one. So what I'll do is, if we do this one, grab, why has that, that's better. Okay, let's put that in the middle for a minute. So if we just jump into the, keyboard stopped working. Okay. That's why I'm the wrong one. Let's come out. Let's jump into demo one authentication. That's much better. Okay, so I've got the files over here. I've got just main and providers. So what I'm going to do here is go Terraform plan. Okay, what this is going to do is going to have Terraform go off. Not going to do anything. Reason being, I haven't initialized the repository yet. Okay, so before I can do anything with it, I've essentially got to go and tell Terraform, download all of the providers so that you know what you're going to be working with. So if we do Terraform init, okay, here we go. Right, it's now downloading the provider to us. Some of the syntax I've got has been deprecated since I did the upgrade, which was just before the session. So that's on me. But you can see there, you get a lot of forewarning if Terraform is going to deprecate something and you need to look at updating your code. You're not just going to run it one day and then the next it doesn't work. Okay, they're very good with backward compatibility. So what I can do now is run the plan. Okay, now what this will do for us, essentially, you can see now it's creating state files over here and various bits and pieces. What it's doing is going off and look at Azure and saying, okay, well, what do I need to do? Okay, so the bit that's important for us here is this bit. Now, for brevity, we're just going to be creating resource groups until we get further down the demo tree. But essentially what we're doing here is we're saying, okay, go and create a resource group for us. So it's telling us what it's going to create. The ID is going to be known after it's created, because that's going to be entirely dependent on the platform it's going to be created and then passed back to us. We can see it's going to be deployed in UK South, and we can see what the name of it's going to be. So when we come back and look at our main.tf, this is where our resources defined. Azure RM is the provider, and it's a resource group within that provider that we're doing, and then it's going to be demo RG. Now, demo RG essentially allows me to reference this particular block of code in other things. So when we get down to the sort of dependency section in a minute, it'll make a little bit more sense, but essentially it allows us to do a fully qualified naming for any of the properties that we want. And the properties here, we're explicitly setting with literals the name and the location. Okay, so if I come back to the code, we go to Terraform apply. Let's drag this up in the middle of the screen so it's a little easier for us to see. What it's going to do is going to go up and do a plan for us, and it's going to say, do you really want to do this? I'm doing this interactively, so I'm going to say yes. There is a flag that you put on the command line that say just automatically do it. So I'm going to say yes, go away, go do, and then it will now talk to the Azure platform, say, right, we're done, nice and quick. This is why we're just doing resource groups at the moment, because it's that quick. We're in, we're completed, happy days. Okay. So that's just been a quick look of authenticating in. I'd use Azure CLI, like I say, I just AZ log in, select your subscription, everything that's for that session, that's what we're doing. So, as we can see here, actually, before we jump into the next bit, we've got this TF state file. This essentially is that little JSON file that I told you about that says what's been deployed. So we can see that there's no tags, no timeouts. We can see there's the ID of it. Let's see all that information. Okay, that's on my machine. That's on my laptop here. That's no good if I'm working in a collaborative environment. Okay, because other people won't have that access to that state file. So what do? So we're going to store it centrally. So this is what's referred to essentially as a remote state. So what we do here is I need to create some, I'll store this one in Azure Blob storage. So what I'm going to do here is create a resource group for my Blob storage, my storage account. I'll just bring that up a bit so you can see there. So I'm just deploying this with Azure CLI. I could use Terraform, but a little bit of variation. So essentially that's going off. It takes a couple of minutes to deploy our storage account. And then once we deploy the storage account, we need to create containers for our state files to live in, basically. Now, if you're using Azure DevOps, there's a whole pile of plugins that have got a lot of these options baked in, so we don't have to be as verbose. We just have to create the storage account and the containers, which we'll do that now. So our storage accounts are all set up. We'll have a look at those shortly. So if I come back to here, save that before I close it. And then let's jump in and say providers. Well, you can see it's the same as it was before. We're specifying a particular version. This time we've now got backend.tf. Okay, this one here. And this is all about where we're going to go and store that information. Okay, so again, I'm being very verbose here with this one. I'm saying, what's the resource group in Azure that I want? What's the name of the storage account? What's the container name? And then what's the key for the state file? And you can parameterize these. You can put in things that will make it a little bit easier to sort of make them more dynamic, things like that. But for the purposes of this, just to make our lives a little easier, I've been very explicit in what we're deploying. And then if I come into main, again, it's just the same again. So just deploying it, it's got a different name this time, so it makes our life a little bit easier. So if we just go to init, wrong one. Oh, that's right, the wrong command window. Into demo 2. Init. Now you can see it's also now adding the steps initializing the backend. So that's putting our file up there for us in a minute, setting it all up so it knows what it needs to be doing. Okay. Terraform apply. Not going to bother with doing a plan because it's going to do that as part of the apply for us. So we'll see what it's going to do. So it should ask me in a second if I really want to be doing this one. Yes, please. Okay. So once this completes, let's go have a quick look at our Blob resource groups. So here we can see that we've got demo 1 and our backend. Demo 2 will appear in there in a moment once my portal catches up. But until that happens, let's dive in and let's have a quick look at this. So there's our backend storage account. Within that, we come in, we've got containers. There's our IC intro container, and here's our state file. Okay, so if I click on that one and click edit, just to show you, what we saw and the one that's on my laptop is now the same as the one that's up here, which means it's now in a centralized location. So we're using automated deployments and things like that by setting this up. It means that we can repeatedly deploy things. We have a team doing work locally, committing it to source control, the pipeline pushing it out and updating a central one that's for testing or part of pre-prod or things like that. Okay, and what it means is that when I've got a build running, it's actually taking a lock on the state file as well, which will prevent 2 deployments happening at the same time and potentially causing conflicts and issues. Okay, so let's see if our demo 2 has arrived yet. There it is. So we've got both of our demo resource groups so far. So it makes life a little bit easier for us. Have we got any questions at all so far? Or are we good? No, I think
you're still good, John.
Good for now.
Awesome. Right.
Yeah, feel free to put your questions in the chat.
Not a problem. So what we'll do now is we'll dive in and we'll start talking about variables. And if we look at this one, we got backend, we've got main, we've got providers, and I've added another file to the mix, variables.tf. Now, if you pull down any of the O'Reilly books about Terraform, there's several different viewpoints for how to lay out your projects. I personally like to break things down to make them easier to manage. So I tend to find smaller code files a little bit easier to manage than something that's, say, 500-600 lines long. If I've got 5 of them that are 100 lines long, it's a little bit easier. There's less merge conflicts, that type of thing, if we've got collaborative environments going on. So anyway, what we've got is the backend's the same, main's the same, provider's the same. No, main's not actually the same. We'll look at that one in a moment. We'll start with variables. So what I've got here, we've got the 2 properties, resource group name, resource group location. Okay, so this is where we say this is the variable name, this is its type, this is a description. That description is because if I run it, it will prompt me on the command line, which means if you start putting a description in there to say, make it something that's readable, something that's human interpretable, what it means is that when someone gets that, they know what they've got to put in there. Don't make it opaque. Okay. What that means is now that we've defined those variables, if we come into main, we've got the ability to put those in as the values that we want for our properties. Now you'll see there's 2 different syntaxes here, okay? This, if you're just putting a single variable value in, this is the syntax to be using, okay? The one above it is referred to as interpolation syntax, which if you want to do string concatenation, so for example, if I was to put in a standardized prefix, so for example, if I was to say JQM dash, and I'm doing anything where I'm putting multiple variables in there and bringing and building that together, that's the interpolation syntax, which is not what we're doing. So just to illustrate the 2 different options there, okay? Now, in addition to that, you'll notice this little vars folder here. What this is where I've put my tf vars file, which is my tf variable file. Essentially, this is an answer file. So when I run the command line, I can say, go and pass in the values for each named variable. Okay, so this matches the variable name in the variables.tf. So basically, it will do a lookup for me and say, okay, it's key value pair. This is the key. That's the value. Inject that. We're off and running. Saves me having to put it in the command line. Okay, so that makes life a little bit easier for us. So if we come back to our command line, into here, 1 minute. I'm going to initialize that one. Here we go. That's all up and running, which is great. Before we do the apply, one thing we'll pop in here and say is, let's go to main. You'll notice my OCD hasn't kicked in here. I've got these not lined up properly. Terraform has this really nice little thing where it can do some formatting for us. So Terraform FMT, yep, this one here. I run that. Now it's all lined up nicely. So again, if I'm being lazy, I don't have to remember to line everything properly up. I just write all my stuff and then say Terraform, format it, make it consistent, make it readable for the person who's following me, for my team colleagues or tomorrow me, you know, makes my life a little bit easier. So if I go Terraform apply at the command line, this one is, you can see here, it's now asking me to provide the region for the resource group. So if I just Control C out of that one, var file equals vars / demo.tf vars. Okay, if I provide it the answer file, then it's going to go and do that lookup for me, and it should just go straight into our apply. Now, one of the things to remember for this is because there's potentially some sensitive information in the TF vars, I tend not to commit those to source control. I might put something in there like a shell one with a slightly different suffix. That way, I make sure I don't commit a password or a secret or something like that that I may have put in there for testing purposes on my machine. And there we go. Right, that's all happy and deployed for us. So we're up and running. So that's all provided. and done everything that we need to do. If we have a quick look at this in the back end, we'll have a quick look and say there, containers, nice intro, demo 3, edit. There's all our information, nice and happy. Okay, so moving on to demo 4. Tags. Tags are important. This is the thing to do. This is how, for things like Azure, it allows us to do billing and roll up and stuff like that, which makes life a lot easier for us. So one of the things that do here is, these are common tags, for example. And I've got the ability to, I've done this one for SQL Denmark before, but I don't set other things like auto cleanup or environment, all of these, that make them variable driven. Timestamps, there's various functions as well. So what I do is, again, come in here into main, I'm now adding some extra pieces here. Now the locals allows me to use some functions. So essentially what I'm doing here is I'm merging all of those into one string. So I don't have to specify multiple tags. What that means is if I go and do an update in the tags file, that will roll through everything very quickly. The other thing to understand here is the life cycle. This is very, very useful for ignoring changes in things. So if between running it now and running it previously, something has changed, if I'm telling it to ignore the changes for something, then it will do exactly that, and it won't either do a recreate or update. One of the big things that's missing on most cloud resources is a created date. So one of the things I tend to do is always put a created date tag onto my resources. What that means is I know when it was created. So if I start seeing a spike in billing, okay, well, what was created on that day? I can start going back and hunting down those resources. Okay, makes life a lot easier for us. Now, one of the other things to think about is, okay, well, if I'm using a timestamp, that's going to change every time I rerun it. That's why I'm using the lifecycle block there to say, just ignore it. Once it's been created, don't bother. So if we come in here now and delete those 2 tags because they're not relevant to us. Rerun the apply. This should pick up there's been a change in the tags, and then we'll go from there. So you can see here that it's going to go and change the tags block for us. Okay. Go. Right then. Be nice and easy. So there we go. It's just gone and changed it. It's not destroyed it. So it's just gone and updated the tags for us. So now they're what we did. But by changing it in one file, I've changed it on all the resources that's then referenced in. So final demo is about dependencies. Now this is the fun one. We dive straight into main, and this is where we're going to be deploying a number of things. So I'm just get rid of these boxes. Okay. So I'm deploying a resource group. I'm then deploying an Azure SQL Server. Up here, I'm using a random ID resource to basically generate a 4-byte character string on the end so that I know it's unique globally. I'm then coming down and saying for Azure SQL Database, I want to create multiple of these. So I'm using the count property. So this is basically saying how many of these do I want to deploy. Then I'm going to set up some firewall rules here. Okay, so if we now come to here, 5 dependencies, Terraform graph. Before we do that though, spell graph, right? So what we'll do
Got
here.
a question here
Yes.
from Suresh in the chat.
Yes.
So he asks, if you rerun Terraform apply again, how will it identify the resource exists and not create it again? Is it based on the resource name?
It uses the IDs. So that's why if you go and change the content in the state file, if the ID matches, then that's really what it's looking for, so that's that uniqueifier. Okay. So if you've got the same thing with multiple names, that's when you can potentially end up with some conflicts. Okay. We're running short on, we're coming close to time, so what we'll do is we'll take that one offline if that's all right. What I've done here is I've just run Terraform graph, and this puts out a digraph notation for us. So if I come to this, see if I can find, let's go web graph is. is it? Web graph is, there we go. So essentially what I can do is if I take the information from that, plumb it in there, I can actually then visualize what my deployment is going to look like. So again, it helps us write our code a little bit better. We can understand what's going on, say, okay, well, here we are with these ones. So I can see what those dependencies are. And we read it from bottom to top, essentially. So the variables are required to deploy common tags, which is then referenced here by the resource group. And that's all referenced down through that line as well. So we can start seeing that dependency in place. Okay, so it becomes very, very important to helping us make sure that we know what we're looking at. Okay. So now if I come to this and do, no, not that one, this one, Terraform apply, what you'll see here is when it gets around to doing the deployment for us, it's going to deploy the resource group, then it's going to deploy the Azure SQL Server, then it's going to deploy multiple Azure SQL databases in parallel. Okay, and because this is going to take a little bit of time compared to some of the ones we've done previously, what you'll see is here we get this information at the bottom, okay, after n number of seconds. So we'll just leave this creating in a moment. Okay, so you can see there, okay, still creating the SQL Server, 10 seconds have elapsed. Okay, so that will go through, every 10 seconds you'll get a notification on that one. Okay, so I know we're at time now, aren't we, Jesse?
Indeed, we are.
Okay, so let's just do one quick summary. It's a cross-platform tool, as I said. You can automate it. You can abstract complexity away. Get it in as code. It means we can version things. We can line everything up, and it means that we can spend a lot more time doing things that are of real value. Thank you very much for having me today. I really appreciate it. If we've got time for questions in general chat, I'll be hanging around. But obviously, I don't want to take any more around as time up. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, John. So actually, yeah, we've got a 10-minute break now. But if you don't mind, people can kind of stick around in the break and ask questions if they wish.
Yep.
And other than that, we'll be back at 8 o'clock for Anna. I think you're on mute, Alex, if you're talking.
Yeah. Jess, did we deal with the question in the open questions? What if you lose your state file?
No, what was that?
I've just seen that one, Peter.
In the questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Peter.
Don't lose your state file.
Or in many places.
Yeah, I mean, that's where making use of, so things like Terraform's online service makes life a little easier because it abstracts that, makes it highly available. Likewise, if you're using Azure Blob storage, for example, that's where you want to turn on the whole soft delete versioning and a sort of redundancy for the storage account. If you do lose the state file, there are some sort of open source solutions out there that will help try and rebuild them. But the thing you've got to remember is that when it builds a state file, it's building of really what you're looking at from a code perspective. So if you have had some changes between then when it was deployed last and the code, or you've got an old version of the code, you start to get really out of sync, and it becomes quite a painful exercise to resync everything and make life a little bit easier. But yeah, there are some there are some open source stuff that can help with that. Question from Sam, is it free? Yes, the command line tool is free. The development environment I was using there, VS Code, is also free, and all of the extensions that I've used there are free as well. The Terraform side of things, I believe there's still a free version of their Terraform Cloud. It's not as fully featured as the enterprise one, which you have to pay for. But the actual command line executable you pull down, and the Terraform that I was running the command prompt, that is all free. Also, the providers are by and large free and open source as well. So if you know how to write things in Go, you can contribute, or you can update it to fill any gaps. Not a problem. Ooh, right, I will keep my mouth shut now. Got 5 minutes. Let Anna get ready for her session. So thank you very much, everyone. And I'll be lurking here with my camera off, Alex, for the rest of this. I'm looking forward to the next one.
Thanks, John.
Thanks very much, John.
How are you doing, Anna? Enjoy that?
It was really good. I've used Terraform a lot before, and it brought a lot of memories back of the awesomeness of Terraform.
You sound
I
like
really
you
love
have battle scars.
Hopefully they were good memories.
They're good memories from the perspective that of having trying to do infrastructure of code without Terraform, and then being introduced to Terraform and just storing that state in the cloud when everyone's trying to make changes to the same environment at the same time. Having that state file in the cloud was awesome, because we could literally just turn around and ask each other what exactly we were doing rather than stepping on each other's toes.
That's one of the things I find really useful, is just being able to lock that state file so I don't have two people deploying at the same time.
Yeah, when you've got a lot of people in a team working on a microservice and you're all trying to work against the same project, it's super useful.
Anna, when you're speaking during your session, do you like to see all of our heads on with our webcams and listening, or would you like us to turn off and get out of your face?
I honestly don't mind, but please shout if there's any pressing questions or anything.
Oh, we will. In which case, I'll turn my face off so I'm less distracting for everybody else.
Yeah, I think I'm beating you on distraction.
Yeah. I've got my video off because I'm just having some dinner.
I had mine earlier. I had a cup of soup for dinner. I'm feeling very, that is amazing. The way it just disappears like that.
I am also having some soup. I'm having some spinach soup.
I'm feeling very hungry. I'm doing the 5-2 diet, and today is one of my fasting days, and 600 calories isn't a lot of calories to get through the day on.
I'll do 600 calories for breakfast.
I'll do at least 600 calories for breakfast tomorrow.
Yeah,
that's a promise. You tend to bounce back on you.
What do you eat then for 600 calories?
Today for lunch, I had a fillet steak with some fried tomatoes and mushrooms, which isn't bad. For breakfast, I had a banana and a boiled egg. And that was most of my calories, which is why I only had a cup of soup for dinner.
Wow.
I tend to preload my calories at the beginning of the day so that I can be reasonably productive up until the end of the working day, and then I can just crash. Of course, today I'm doing this, so probably going to turn off the webcam now and go to sleep.
Is it 5 days normal calories and then 2 days 600, or the other way around?
It's I only have to do 2 fasting days a week.
Oh, okay, fine. Okay.
I think the concept is to trick your body into burning calories at the rate that you do on your regular days,
right?
And then kind of kick you into starvation mode on the other 2 days and actually burn some of the fat off. It works really well. Cool, just a couple of minutes. Are you all set and ready, Anna?
I think so. I'll pray to the demo gods. It'll all be fine. If you see something moving in the background, that's my dog.
I think we want to see your dog. Where's your dog?
She doesn't. She's so lazy, she won't come on command. But she is there somewhere.
Oh, we can do sharing. I'll get my cat if you get the dog.
I don't think Alex knows you've got a staffy.
Oh.
This is Willow, and at the moment she's being. I've got to put you in front of her. Yeah.
You can.
At the moment she's being very compliant. Normally she's quite moody. I'm going to put her down now.
My cat only tends to show. I'm surprised it didn't show up today because it waits to hear me talking, and it's like, "Oh, you're on a call. I want fuss." My hour is not convenient, Furball. Go away.
If you are, if you work in tech and you have a cat, if you haven't already learned that you still need to lock your screen even though you're working from home, you need to learn it very quickly, because my cat definitely likes the laptop keyboard as a place to sit. It's nice and warm.
It's coming up to 8 o'clock, so let us get started. So, hi everyone. If you're joining us now or joining us after the break, we have Anna here with us, who's going to be talking about custom logging within Databricks.
Cool. Can you see my screen okay?
Yep, loud and clear.
Awesome. Okay, custom logging within Databricks. First of all, who am I? So I'm a senior advancing analytics consultant. I specialize in data engineering and cloud. I've got over 15 years experience, most recently working with Microsoft Data Platform, Scala, Kafka, and various cloud tech. Started off in software engineering, absolutely love data, so I've ended up going down the data engineering route and essentially becoming a consultant. I've got a Bachelor of Science in Multimedia Computing and a HND in Visual Communications. I'm quite heavily involved in the community, so I'm a co-organiser of Data Bristol, and I'm heavily involved in Women's Tech Hub in Bristol, trying to get more women into tech. So organising events, going to be writing some blogs and their new magazine as well. So definitely check it out, especially if you're a girl or if you know women in tech or women who want to get into tech. And they also get involved with some local co-clubs and stuff as well. So that's my sales pitch. Custom logging within Databricks. What are we going to do? So we're going to look at logging and why should we care. Then dive into some structured logging. Logging essentially are metrics within Azure, what we get out of the box. Logging metrics within Databricks, what we get out of the box. And then we'll have an actual real world demo. So something taken out of my day job essentially. So logging, why should we care? So if I was in a room at the moment, I'd basically get everyone to put their hands up as to who's actually got into work, say 9 o'clock in the morning, and immediately been pounced upon because an ETL pipeline has failed overnight. It took hours and hours to run, failed. We need the data. Your stakeholders are going crazy. You need to sort it out. You need to figure out what's going on. Anyone who's been there essentially will have been there digging into the processes, trying to dig into the logs, figure out what's going on. And that's essentially a perfect example of where logging comes into its own. Logging is commonplace in software engineering. So I've got a strong background in software engineering, and logging is essentially something that you just do. It's just there. You do it without thinking. We just have logging metrics. It's implemented in our solutions. But why is logging often overlooked when it comes to data engineering? So that's a question essentially we should be asking ourselves. And why aren't we bringing in these core concepts into our data engineering projects more often and more from day one, so right at the beginning of our greenfield projects? So often when I ask people about logging and why it's not implemented, they're just like, well, it's just for capturing and reacting to errors, right? So it's just something we can add in as an afterthought. Well, logging helps capture events in a linear order. It helps you trace back when errors occur. You can see how far your process has got to, including triggering events and subsequent paths taken. But most importantly, we can have the output of processes. We can track results, we can track counts, we can track timings. And these are all things that we can then utilize within our monitoring tools to actually monitor, essentially, for example, our ETL processes. And essentially, what that does is it helps you meet your SLAs, your service level agreements, and your SLOs, your service level objectives. So it's not just about capturing those errors, it's capturing all the information that you could potentially need within, for example, your ETL processes, your data engineering pipelines. Structured logging. So structured logging is essentially the practice of implementing a consistent predetermined message format from application logs that allow them to be treated as data sets rather than text. So if we take this example piece of code here, so we've just got log.log, we're saying it's information, so we're saying it's info. And then there's our log message. This is my log message. So that's just a piece of text. It's just a string. So that's great. We can push that into our logging systems, but it's not providing us a lot of information. It's still something if that message was a big message, we'd have to dig into it to try and figure out what's going on. Structured logging, on the other hand, if we look at this example here, is essentially we're putting our log into JSON and we're creating our own custom structured log types. So we still have our message. This is my log message. And then we're also essentially defining some additional additional properties within that JSON, within that piece of logging that we want to then put into our logging system. So we're also logging the process started as a custom log event. So we're going to have lots of different custom log events, and this one in particular is going to be a process that started, and then we're also capturing created app. Now this is just an example. The amount of stuff you can put in there is infinite. But these are two very common concepts and areas that you'd start off with. So you just start building up some custom log events, and you start putting some dates in there. And then you potentially move on to things like row counts and things that have and haven't completed. So how have I used this before in software engineering? So I've said that I've used logging a lot, and structured logging within my career as a software engineer. How exactly have I used it? So we've got our guy here, this is our user, and he basically wants to pay a bill. So whether that's a subscription, whether that's a utilities bill, he wants to go online onto the website and actually pay a bill. So there's a website, and then it hits the back end. Now, common misconception is it's just going to hit one service in the back end, and that'll be it, make the payment, and it comes back to him and says whether it's successful or failed. Well, actually, with large companies that I've worked for, it's more complex than that. So a system that I worked on, we essentially had a payment service, billing and statement service, customer service, notification service. And these are essentially all microservices in the background that are affected by this one transaction. And we want to log all of that information as it's happening. We want to define some structured logs so we can track what's going on. What can those structured logs be? For example, with the payment service, we could have payment received event, a payment rejected, a payment approved, time received, time processed, and essentially a fail to communicate. So what happens if we fail to communicate with that service? What happens if we're doing a load of retries in case that happens, but we want to actually log that we've on numerous occasions actually failed initially to communicate with that service? We want to tell the people who are responsible for that service that this keeps happening. Billing and statement service. So similarly, we're going to have bill requested, bill amended, where the amendment's been approved, time received, time processed, and again, the fail to communicate. Similarly with the customer service, customer info requested, customer info retrieved, customer not found, time received, time processed, fail to communicate. Notification service. So this is essentially sending out email notifications, SMS notifications. So a notification that an event triggered, notification that an email or SMS was sent. Once again, time received, time processed, failed to communicate. So how can we apply this to data engineering? So that's an example within the realms of software engineering. How can we apply this to one of our ETL pipelines or a load of ETL pipelines? So our user has mutated into a data engineer. And he's got a load of data sources, ALTP database, third-party REST API, Blob storage. And essentially, he's got a load of ETL batch pipelines that he is going to use to actually pull all of that data and then essentially put it into a data lake or a data lake house. What are some of the custom log events that we could create, our structured logs around this? So we can have things like row count, processed row count, failed row count, an invalid data type, for example. So if somebody's landed a file that's in the wrong format, for example, once again, time received, time processed, failed to communicate again. Okay, so that's logging and structured logging and why it's super useful. What do we get within the realms of Azure? So what do we get out of the box when we want to actually start working with this within our Azure ecosystem? So Azure offers us, let's have a drink, sorry. Azure essentially offers us Azure Monitor. Now, Azure Monitor is a suite of tools which basically gives you that functionality that you need to be able to store your logs and then actually react and report on them. So we've got insights, visualization, analysis, respond, which is like email response and SMS responses. And then you can also integrate into things like Event Hub, Logic Apps, and export APIs. So just to note, this isn't unique to Azure. So you can also have custom sources. So if you wanted to plug this into AWS and GCP and local data centers, you can. That is something you can do. So if somebody at your company argues that they want something that's cross-platform, essentially Azure Monitor does have those connectors available for you to be able to do that. So the Log Analytics Workspace, so we're going to be focusing on the Log Analytics Workspace, getting our logs in there, essentially what it can do for us, and how we can then integrate those logs within our Azure Monitor and actually do stuff with them. The Log Analytics Workspace is essentially like a data warehouse of logs, and you use KQL, which is a query language, to essentially query those logs once you've got them in there. But within the Log Analytics Workspace, you can also set up connectors to event hubs, which is great for event pipelines, and then also storage, which is essentially the original one, and it's great for long-term retention. Now, just quickly, this is a diagram of how the Azure Monitor alert workflow works. Now, this is where we will be able to actually set up a trigger to send out an email or send out an SMS message, or even send out a voice message as well. That is also an option which I haven't actually tried yet. So this is just an example of the workflow essentially under the hood that happens that enables you to do that. And like I said, it's great for triggering emails, SMS, and running processes off the back of alerts. So let's grab another drink here. Logging in Databricks. So that's what we get in Azure. We've talked about how and why logging is awesome. What do we get in Databricks? What do we already have for Databricks? Now, for Databricks, there are a load of tools that you can use already mostly for metrics, but also for logging. One really popular one is Grafana. And what I've provided at the bottom there, and I'll provide this at the end as well, is a link to some Microsoft documentation as to how you can actually hook Grafana up to Log Analytics and create yourself some dashboards, which is super useful. I am going to be writing a blog around that as well, and I'm going to be writing some blogs around all of this that I'm covering in this talk. So anything that doesn't make sense, if you want to dig more deeply into, I will in time be writing some blogs around it, and I already have, a Git repo with all of the code that I'm going to show you, which I will provide the link to at the end as well. So we also have the tried and trusted Spark UI within Databricks. So this is what you get with any Spark implementation, Databricks implementation. You have the Spark UI that you can go to and start digging into and start looking at your metrics, looking at the logs that have come out from your events, from any failures, and you can dig in and start figuring out what's going on when things have gone wrong. And then, of course, we've got Azure Log Analytics, which you've already spoken about. Now, Azure Log Analytics out of the box, essentially, you can create a connection between your Databricks instance and your Log Analytics instance, and it will give you a load of metrics data out of the box. So it will create a series of tables, which you can see here on the right under Log Management, prefixed with Databricks, which will essentially give you a load of metrics data that you can start working with out of the box. So you can start attempting to create some dashboards or some alerting, or just start digging into and having a play around with. But what you don't get is you don't out of the box get custom logging, and that's what we're going to be digging into. So you don't get that functionality of being able to do that .log info, .log error. That's something that that within this talk I'll demo to you how I've generated essentially a process to do that with some Python code. So to do that, essentially, we're going to work with the Log Analytics REST API. So I will provide this again at the end, as with any links that I've got in my slides. So this is a link to the REST API documentation. And what you essentially get with the REST API for Log Analytics is you are able to manage Log Analytics resources. You can send custom log data to Log Analytics, which is what we're going to do. And then you can access your logs and analytics data and essentially start analyzing it. So we are now going to dive into our real world demo. What exactly is this going to consist of? We're going to go through the setup of Log Analytics for Databricks. We're going to create a Python wheel containing Log Analytics REST API logic to create our logs. We're going to write some custom logs via Databricks notebooks, explore our custom logs in Log Analytics, and create Azure Monitor alerts for our custom logs. So to create the connector between your Log Analytics instance within Azure, so this is the Azure portal. To create that connection, you go to Diagnostic Settings, then you can filter by your subscription and your resource group. So I've set up my own little resource group here for this demo, so custom logging and Databricks. And within here, I started creating some resources. And you can see here we've got our Databricks instance. How do we connect that up to Log Analytics? Well, you can literally go into it, and then it takes ages to load. So bear with me a second. You can go to here and basically add a diagnostic setting. Now, as you can see, I've already created one. Here's one I made earlier. And this is essentially a diagnostic setting that's connecting my Databricks instance to Log Analytics. So if we go into the details of that, you can see I've told it to essentially log everything possible. So DBFS, clusters, accounts, jobs, notebooks, SSH, workspace, secrets, secret permissions, instance pools, everything possible. I want to push that into my Log Analytics instance. And this retention is essentially saying it's at 0 because it's essentially saying don't delete it. Retention is essentially there is no retention, just keep it infinitely. So you can essentially set that to whatever you like. So if you wanted to keep it as 12 months, 6 months, you can do. And then on the right hand side, we are simply specifying the subscription, the workspace. So that's our Log Analytics instance. And then I've also checked this archive to storage account. So this is where we can write all of this into blob storage, which is super useful for long-term retention. And then you can also have other processes read into that. So other logging tools. I haven't selected the event hub because that's outside the scope essentially of this demo. Okay, so now we are actually within Log Analytics itself. And so in here, you can see, so this is in the Azure portal, just going to our Log Analytics instance. In here, I've clicked on logs. We can see those tables that we saw in my slide deck in that screen grab. So we've got all of our Databricks tables here, and that's all our metrics information. But what we're interested in is this custom logs. So these are essentially some custom logs that I've already created. And when I created them, it's essentially created me these custom log tables. So no imagination, my custom logs _ error, and then my custom logs _ info. So how do we query this? Well, essentially using KQL, we can start building up our queries here. So I'm doing a very simple query of the info table where my log type is got data log event. So if we were to then open this up, we can see that log type property there. Where has that come from? That has come from me defining that in my JSON and my custom log. I've said I'm going to have a property called log type, and essentially it's inferred it as being a string because that's what I've provided. And so because it's then recognized that as its own property within its own right, I'm then able to essentially query on it. So if you run this query again, you'll see some logs that I essentially generated earlier. And in here, you can see that log type there again, but then we've also got other custom properties that I've added in. So that who's there, that's something that I added. Our message, so that would be our big beefy message if it is a massive message that we can put in there. So we can still push out all of our error information from a try catch, for example, but we can just enrich it with all this useful information. So yeah, we've also got like row count, application. So that's the name of the actual notebook that we're going to be working with. So super useful stuff. You can see it in Log Analytics. What do we do if we want to actually put this into a dashboard? I just want to say at this phase, I'm going to show you the code and everything, but I'm just illustrating to you what it looks like within Log Analytics first, the end result, and then we'll dive into and look at what the code looks like and what it looks like in the notebook where I'm generating those logs. So what we can literally do a pin to dashboard here. It gives us the option of private and shared. We just stick to private for now. Let's go to that. Actually, I've got my dashboard here. So what you can see here is this one at the bottom here. That's one I made earlier. This one here is what it's just pinned to our dashboard. So this is my own private dashboard that once I'm happy with it, I can then publish it, share it with other people in the team, share it with stakeholders. In some companies I've worked with, when we've generated dashboards like this, we've actually put them on a big screen in the office so that we can constantly monitor our applications, especially when you're working with structured logging, so you can look at timings and row counts and things. And essentially what it's done is it's created me this analytics cell here. And if we go into some of these buttons here, we can see what we can do to customize it. So we can change our title, change our subtitle, can change our query. And you can select whether you want your results to be, as we're seeing it here, so just listed, or we can actually change that to be a chart. We should bring that down. Yeah. So we can click on and say, right, we want this to actually be a chart, and that's what you can see there, what I've already been fiddling with. And then we can actually start fiddling with the chart itself. We can change it from a column to a variety of other options like line chart, scatter, pie, donut. And then we can change the x-axis and the y-axis, so we can select basically our structured logging properties here. So we've got our row count essentially as one of my structured logging properties that I've defined, so I can select that and start using that to generate my charts. And it could essentially just be a count. If you just wanted to do a count on rows, you could just create a cell for that as well. It doesn't have to be charts. But this is just a nice example to get going. And here in this top one, you can see I've basically defined it via row count and time generated. And so I've been running this intermittently today. So you can see some bars here essentially indicating what the row count is and essentially when it was ran. So that's the dashboard, and that's a very, very beginner demo dashboard. You can make this wonderful, weird and wonderful, put lots of stuff in there, start adding your metrics in there as well. So really powerful and really great to share with other people within the company as well. What do we want to do essentially if we want to now alert? So going into Azure Monitor, so this is what we were talking about, that suite of tools that we can use to basically work with our logs and our metrics. So I've just gone into the Azure portal and opened up Azure Monitor, and in here, you can see you've got this logs button here, and that will literally take you to what we were just looking at. That will take you to Log Analytics. What we're interested in is how can we set up alerts. So if we go into alerts here, you can see we've got informational here, and that's because I've already got some set up. So that's telling us what has been running, what's been triggered. We go to manage our alerts. Now it's these top two here that we're interested in. These are the two that I've set up. So I've set up an excessive number of ETL processes running and a wrong file data type. So if we just go into the top one first, so essentially defining what the log analytics instances that we're going to be working with, and then we've defined a query. So essentially, as you can see, we've got the same sort of query as what we were just looking at within log analytics. So I've essentially defined a query as to what I want to actually alert on. So I want to say when we've got a get data logging event, structured logging type, and then I want to essentially, when the number of counts of instances of that log is greater than 10. Now in the real world, that would actually be higher. Obviously, we're not bothered if there's 10 ETL processes running, but in the real world, if that actually becomes quite large, it is something that you could, for example, monitor. So if this went up to like 1,000, we could then send an email alert out to the relevant people to say, we've got a lot of ETL processes running at the moment, might want to check that out and make sure that nothing's throttling, and just make sure that there's nothing running exceptionally slow. And essentially, we've got a period at the bottom here. So this is just how many times have we had that message in the last 5 minutes. So we don't care if it's happened, say in the last 24 hours, that's normal. But if in the last 5 minutes we've got a massive count, then essentially we want to react to that. So what does it look like when we actually get an email alert from that? So this is essentially what we get. This is something I triggered earlier. We can see our query again that we're just looking at. It provides you with loads of useful information, so some of our structured logging information again. And what I find super useful is an actual link to Log Analytics to then start digging into those processes and start figuring out what's going on. So view all the 204 results for that particular query, but you can then start building on it. So then we've also got this wrong file data type as well. Very similar to the last alert, we've got a query set up here. Very similar, just looking for a particular structured log type of wrong data type log event. But with this one, is actually saying the threshold is if I get any messages at all. So if it's above 0, essentially we've hit a wrong data type and we need to react to that straight away. So this is an alert that's essentially marked as an error that we'd email out, we'd send an SMS. You could set this up to also trigger to send to a Teams channel or a Slack channel if you wanted to. You can set it up to trigger, say, an Azure function or logic apps. So the possibilities are infinite, what you can actually do as a reaction to this event. But again, this is essentially going to trigger every if we get more than one of these within the last 5-minute period. Okay, so we've looked at the dashboard, we've looked at the alerts that have been set up. How exactly have I set that up? How have I actually triggered those? How have I actually triggered those logs? Well, this is a notebook that we're going to be working with, and this is working with some code that I've put together and put into a Python wheel. Now, a Python wheel, for those who aren't aware, is essentially a library within Python. So it's a way of packaging up your code into a library that you can then push into essentially whatever system you're working with. And in this context, we are working with Databricks. So let's dive into that code. So here we moved over to Visual Studio Code. And I have a series of Python scripts which I have built up to enable us to be able to write those logs into Log Analytics and essentially then start to react on them. So this is all working, as mentioned, with the REST API. So to start with, we've just got this post logs, and this is literally doing as it says on the tin. I'm just going to check the time. This is essentially doing as it says on the tin. This is literally just posting some logs. So this is our base level of functionality, which the rest of the functionality essentially builds on top of. So This is essentially communicating directly with the REST API, and all of the functionality within this wheel essentially uses this to be able to write the logs. So once we've got that set up, and we've also got like this build signature as well, which is security, which I won't dig into at this phase, but as mentioned, I'm going to write some blogging around this. So if you are interested, you can grab it from GitHub, and I will be writing some blogs around all of this. So once we're actually logging into Log Analytics, we want to actually have more functionality than that. We want to actually define whether it's information, whether it's error, whether it's just a warning, and then we want to start working with structured logging. So we then have this custom logging.py, and essentially in here, what we are doing is we've got a series of functions. We've got a log info, log error, log warning, log critical, and these are all essentially building up your log information. So it's taking a message, enriching it with application, cluster ID, session ID, who wrote it, and we saw that in our log analytics, and then the message itself. And then we're pushing it into this base log info, which essentially is utilizing, and that's that Python file there, and that's essentially utilizing this post log.py. So this is enriching our log message with loads of useful information and effectively turning it into a structured log. And this is using, for those familiar with Databricks, this is essentially using dbutils and pulling loads of useful information using dbutils. So we're getting information about the notebook, we're getting information about the cluster and the session and the current user. And then we're then able to put that into our log so that we can then work with that. So this is great, but we want to actually add our own additional structured logging into this. So we want that actual log type that we were seeing. We want to add in things like our row counts. How do we do that? So essentially, all this is it's JSON. So all we need to do, and what we've got here, is to create some more functionality, which is essentially going to take, as well as the message, some structured logs, some structured log information. So in that structured log information, we are going to have some JSON, which is going to have all of that data that we're interested in. So then we're taking all that base information that we're already using to enrich our logs, and then adding in whatever structured logs we've piped in. So this is essentially dynamic. So we can put in there whatever we like. So we're taking that information and then we're concatenating it all together. We're building up our JSON objects. And again, we're then going to our base log methods, which will work with that post log underscore log to essentially write this to Log Analytics using our REST API. So essentially, this is the wheel that we've put together. And what makes this the wheel is our setup.py. So in setup.py, we've got all of our useful information that basically defines what the name is, what the version is, who the author is. So all of that useful information that again then gets packaged up within your wheel. And we basically run a Python command against this setup.py to create that wheel. So going back into our notebook is essentially utilizing that wheel. So I have created that wheel manually and then manually uploaded that into Databricks. So if we were to go into our clusters, go into our libraries, you can see here, this is the wheel that I've generated from that code. And in this instance, I've manually installed it because this is a demo, into our Databricks instance. And we can then go into our notebook. And you can see here right at the top, we're importing the namespace essentially of that wheel that I've created. So we've called our wheel this, and then we have .utils.custom logs. So that reflects the file folder structure that we were just looking at within that code. And we're naming it custom logs, and then we're also grabbing our structured logging code. So we've named that structured logs. And then what I'm doing is essentially I'm going through and I'm setting up a load of basically just some demo logs that we can as we've already seen them work with to actually start building up dashboards and alerts. So we have custom logging here, .log info. As you can see, we're just passing in a string, so just a message, because as we've discussed, this is just out of the box, just throw some text in there. So that could be a massive log error, just throw it in there, and that is essentially enabling you to do that. So that's without the additional structured logging, but it will, as we saw, enrich it with additional useful information like the name of the notebook, the session ID, the name of the person who actually instigated this. And then we've got an example of our structured logging. So that log info takes the message as well, but then here is where we've got some actual JSON that we're parsing in, and that's where we've got our log type. And that's where I've just defined a getting data log event. And now for demo purposes, whenever this runs, I've got it printing out essentially for the structured logging what it's actually compiled together for the structured log. So this essentially is our JSON. When it gets this message, when it gets this snippet of JSON here, this is what it's actually creating. So it's got the application, the cluster ID, the session ID, the who, so that's me, the message, but then we've also got this log type. So as we defined here, we're adding in a log type property. You can see here it's added it in there into our JSON, and this will, as I keep saying, get them pushed into Log Analytics. So because I was being a little bit, not lazy, but I wanted to keep this simple, I am using what Databricks give you out of the box when it comes to data sets. So they give you a load of sample data sets that you can work with to get going in Databricks. So that is literally in this Databricks datasets file path. So what I'm doing is I'm just grabbing some of their sample data to actually then start writing some logs into the database based on the data that we're working with. So I'm using dbutils again. This is the data. I'm just investigating what the data looks like. So I'm working with a CSV file. And then initially I'm setting up what's today's date, because I want to push a date into there. And then we're doing a bit of structured logging. So once again, I've just put working in as a message, but like I said, that could be an elaborate, massive piece of text if you wanted it to be. And then we've got a structured log, a log type, and then getting data log event, a process ID, super useful if you're doing this across applications, so not just within the context of Databricks. If you're constantly parsing through your process ID, you're then able to trace your logs across applications. So process ID, super useful, and then also a time started. And then we're doing basically basically creating a data frame from that data set we're looking at. So we're just going to do a simple spark.read, tell it it's going to be CSV, tell it to include the header, grab that data, and I'm doing a dataframe.show to force an actual action, because transformations and actions within Databricks, we want to force it to actually grab that data, go away and do that processing. And then we're doing a structured log again to literally just say got data log event. So I'm getting my data, I've got my data, and then I'm passing in again the process ID, the row count this time, which is super useful. So we're actually looking to see how many rows did we get from that data, and then pushing that into our logs so we can monitor and see, for example, if we're getting particularly large amounts of data in particular files, and we can actually react to that with our within our alerts. We can react to it within our dashboards. We can have something kind of flash up and highlight red when something is actually higher than a certain count. Once again, we've got our time started. So what's useful to note, and I just remembered I forgot to show you this, which is like super useful. When we're looking at our, for example, our row count and our process ID, it's got a data type next to it of real. Now that's not something that I've told it to do. It's basically looked at the data that we've given it, and it's basically inferred that that's the data type I'm going to give it. So out of the box, it's going to say it's a string, because in those instances, I was giving it text. But in this instance, it's recognized that process ID is always numeric, so it's given as a type of real. Now you can work on that, and especially with like dates and things, and make sure
that it infers the correct type. So if it doesn't quite get it right, you can work on that and make sure it is inferring it correctly. But it's nice that just out of the box, it's done that for us. And it also makes it super useful when we're doing reporting and alerting, when we're working with counts and things and dates. So yeah, so that's our happy path, essentially. So we're looking at some happy path scenarios here. So we're getting data, we've read our data, great, we've got a row count. What happens when we want to actually record an error? And that's where we were looking at that wrong data type event. So here I'm looking at a different data set, and what I'm deliberately doing and what I'm deliberately going to show you now is that I'm deliberately giving it the wrong data type for what I'm trying to read, so that I can then force it to error, which is why I've got this try catch around this code, force it to error and force it to basically write one of those wrong data type log events, and that essentially will then trigger that alert. So I've got a very simple try except. Obviously in the real world, we would have accepting lots of different scenarios. So we'd have lots of different exception types, and we'd build this up so that we can make it as robust as possible. But for simplicity, for this demonstration, I've just got a very simple try except, because I know it's going to fail, because I've essentially given it the wrong data type deliberately. So here you can see, once again, we're doing a structured log, get data log event, as you saw above. But then here, it's doing essentially a wrong data type because it's failed, and that then writes into Log Analytics. And again, we can see the JSON that it's generating below here. So we can see those two bits of JSON from when it was getting the data and from when it failed. And we can see our log types there. So what I've also done in this notebook, and again, this will be available in GitHub for anyone who wants to have a play around with it, which is also why it's super useful to use the Databricks datasets out of the box. So I'm not asking you to attempt to try and connect to a data lake or anything. You can literally, hopefully, just run this as soon as you've got the wheel installed. So what I'm doing here is literally, I'm just saying write like 100 instances of this log message. And this was literally just so I could show you that first alert message that is reacting on the number of these logs being higher than 10. So I'm just pushing in a load of logs into the database just to prove that our alert works. So yeah, so that's essentially it. So we've got a wheel and we've got a notebook here that's basically testing that wheel logic, which, like I said, you guys can pick up after this and have a play around with. Okay. Okay, so useful links, that is the actual repository, that's where all my code is. So you'll find a copy of the slide deck as well there. And then just some useful Microsoft links to get started with Log Analytics, the Log Analytics REST API, and as mentioned before, Grafana as well. So metrics and monitoring within Log Analytics. So thank you very much for coming to my talk. It's been a pleasure. I hope it's all made sense. And haven't rushed over some of the bits too quickly, especially when it comes to like wheels and things. Those are my social media links, and please just message me if you have any questions or if you just want to connect. Yeah, just give me a shout.
Thanks, Anna. That was great. We're a bit quiet in the chat. Does anyone have any questions? Means you did a stellar job. Just checking YouTube to see if there's anything. Don't think so.
I'm just sorry that the costumes dropped off a little bit. I was very, very hot.
I'm wearing my Advancing Analytics hoodie, but I'm getting really hot in it, so I was considering taking it off. I'm branded.
Well, okay, so if there's no questions, I'm going to switch to my screen for a second. So before we go on to that, so yeah, thanks to John and Anna. Can you all see my screen even? Awesome. So there is a competition for feedback. So you could win yourself a drone. So I'm gonna pop this in the chat. And I see a comment in the chat. Oh, we do have a question. What's the view on logging in, is it Apache, Spark pools in Azure, Synapse, and Analytics? Is it similar, better, or worse?
It's not something that I've dug into yet. It's a good question. It'd be nice as soon as I do. That's something that I'd like to blog about and talk about. So
There's just another one in the Q&A as well. It's from Peter. What is the cheapest way to get started with Databricks? Can you create a container in Docker locally with the runtime?
It's quite, I'd say if you want to set it up from scratch, Databricks, it's a little bit painful. I definitely recommend if you can get some free credits in Azure or in any of the other providers, so you can get Databricks in GCP and AWS, is to actually use it there, because you can literally spin it up at the push of a button.
I think Community Edition's all right as well. Sorry, Anna.
Yeah, that's right.
So yeah, there's Community Edition as well, which I think is the way I got going with it. Yeah, it doesn't take a lot of Azure credits to get a small runtime running with like a smallish cluster on.
Yeah, I think that you can get it's free of charge.
Yeah.
There's another question here from Daniel saying, Anna, great talk. How much of what you showed can be deployed with Terraform?
So are we talking about deploying Databricks itself, or the wheel, or the notebook, or actually Log Analytics and Azure Monitor? You can certainly get ARM templates for Azure Monitor and your alerts. You can certainly do that. I haven't dug into yet what you can do with Terraform.
Cool. Thanks, Anna. Any other questions in the chat? Oh, we've got another one. They're all flying in now. Can you get which user is running a notebook or accessing a table, even if the lake is mounted via service principal? It's an interesting one.
Certainly with the context of a notebook, it's going to grab whatever's running that notebook. So if it's not a user running the notebook, then it's going to identify it as being the service principal. Because it's essentially all it's doing is going away and grabbing whatever's running it. So yeah. Does that answer the question?
Does that answer the question, Richie? Yep. Thank you. And we've got a comment from Cameron saying there is now a Databricks provider for Terraform, which is rapidly evolving.
Nice.
Awesome. Just give it a minute, just see if any other questions pop in. Okay, so yeah, I'm gonna go back to the slide for a second. So yeah, there's a drone. I popped it in the chat. Maybe it got lost there with all the questions, but you should be able to use that. There is a deadline, so we do want kind of responses and feedback by 10 a.m. tomorrow. So you can go in and select the speaker. You can also go in and kind of add comments on how you found this platform or anything for us at Data Relay as well. And tomorrow, as you know, we have a whole schedule of events. We're at Mercia. We have Laura presenting on Brilliant Report, Can I Print It? And we've got Aaron doing a session on the Azure SQL database. So do come along to that if you're interested. Thank you all for joining us. Any last words from Anna, Arthur, or John?
Very much for having me. And no, thanks, Anna.
Thank
that was a
you.
great session.
Yeah, thank you so much. I learned so much in that. That was really good, really engaging. I know it's hard with these online sessions.
Yeah, I'm always looking for feedback for my sessions, ways to improve. So if anything wasn't clear, please let me know.
Thanks, guys. It looks like
Thank you.
we're getting lots of positive feedback already in the chat. So thanks for your time tonight, guys. Really appreciate it.
No worries.
Thank you, not a problem.
All the best
So much.
for the rest of the events.
Thank you. Gonna figure out how to stop this live on YouTube. I guess I just click the button and say stop.